Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Empra, and in today's video I'm gonna be talking about my top 5 things I wish I knew before I became a music producer and DJ. To kick off 2022 the right way, I figured I'm gonna make a video about my top 5 things I wish I knew before becoming a music producer and DJ. These 5 points are equally important and in no particular order at all. But without further ado, let's jump right into tip number 1. Learn how to use stock plugins and effects the right way. I know it can be very tempting to buy the top plugins that all your favorite artists are using, but let me tell you, it is very important that you figure out how to use your stock plugins first and how to apply these effects in your production. In my opinion, what you should do is master these 5 plugins or effects from your DAW. Equalizer, reverb, compression, delay, and distortion and saturation. After learning these 5, you can go ahead and figure out if you even need third-party plugins. In most cases, the stock plugins from your DAW are more than good enough already, but if you know what you're doing, you can then buy some plugins and don't waste any money, because you know what you're buying and you know what effects you're gonna get. Tip number 2. Using the right gear. In my opinion, there is no right or wrong when it comes down to choosing gear for producing music. It doesn't really matter if you work on a Mac or a PC, however, there are some differences. So if you want to use Logic Pro X as your DAW for music production, then you gotta get a MacBook, a Mac Mini, or any Apple computer, because it's Apple exclusive. It's from Apple, and of course it's not gonna be on PC. If I would be recommending one piece of gear though, it would be Sonarworks Reference ID. And a decent pair of headphones or studio speakers. Obviously, getting both would be perfect. For speakers, I would recommend the Yamaha HS7, and for headphones, the Biodynamic DT990. Anyway, what Sonarworks is doing, it's a measurement microphone, and you measure your room and your speakers and your studio space. And because the microphone is measuring your room, you will get a frequency response from your room and your speakers. And you have to imagine that the best case scenario would be to have a very flat EQ curve. Like, if you look at the screen right now, you can see that this would be the perfect scenario, that you have an EQ curve that is flat, that is at 0 dB for all frequencies. But I think honestly this is not even possible to achieve. Essentially what the software is doing is, after measuring your room, it makes your room or your headphones sound completely flat. And at first, especially on headphones, it sounds very unnatural because you're used to the sound of your headphones. But if you activate this while mixing and mix for an hour or 2, you're gonna be surprised how good your mix is gonna sound after you deactivate it and listen to it in the car or on your phone or your laptop speaker or whatever. This really was a game changer for me, and it helped me to tidy up my mixes, so I highly recommend getting this. By the way, this is not sponsored at all. I do not work with Sonarworks in any way, but I would love to in the future, so Sonarworks, please hit me up, maybe? Moving on to tip number 3. Trying out different DAWs. Alright, hear me out. I think this one is very underrated and a lot of producers should give this a go. Let me explain. So back in the day I made music with FL Studio, and I think it's a great DAW. Especially the workflow is unmatched in my opinion, but I think FL Studio is kinda messy. It's just not fun to organize your sessions in FL Studio. One of the biggest downsides to FL Studio, this program really loves to crash. But then in 2016, I wanted to be able to be portable with my music production setup, so I decided to switch to a MacBook Pro and therefore switch to Apple and Mac. So I figured I'm gonna give Logic Pro X a chance, because Mike Williams, one of my favorite artists at the time, did the same. I could immediately see why. Like, even to this day, I think it's the best looking DAW, but even though it's very, very clean and organized and you can work very streamlined in it, I think it's very limiting in your creative process and creative workflows, which is kinda annoying because some of the best tracks start by trying something creative. But then one day there was a big update for Logic Pro X, and I updated my version as well, and after that I was not able to open about 50% of my projects. I was very mad at the time, but then my good friend Gregor suggested that I should try out their DAW, Studio One. But I will talk about this in a dedicated video in the future as well. Essentially, what you're gonna get from switching to different DAWs is that you have a very different approach to creating music every time you work in a different DAW. Take a look at Nicky Romero. He uses Studio One to time stretch his vocals and samples and then imports them back to Logic Pro X where he produces his music, because Studio One's algorithm is just better at time stretching than the Logic one is.
So it's really challenging to have a song that's recorded at 150 beats per minute. To take that down to 126 without feeling too slow and a significant amount of quality loss. So in my experience, there's a software package called Studio One, and this is how it looks like. That's much better in stretching than Logic is, or than maybe Ableton is. I know that Ableton has a decent function. With Complex Pro you can, get really good results, but Studio One has an engine that's just so much better than most of the other things out there.
Speaking of samples, let's go ahead and move on to tip number 4. Is it okay to use samples in your music? And this is just my opinion. Keep this in mind. You can have another opinion. It's more than fine and more than okay to use samples in your productions. And I'm not only talking about kicks and claps, but even whole sample loops. My track Red Lights was built around one single bassline loop from Splice. And no one gives a shit. I even tried to reproduce the bassline and switch out the sample and use my own bassline I then created in Serum, but it just sounded worse than the sample. And let me ask you this, why would you use your own Serum sound that you created instead of using the sample when the sample just sounds better and makes the track better? Because in the end, it's not about you, it's about the song. The song has to be as good as possible. The track was almost finished and I needed to travel to Amsterdam, and I had this video shoot with Pepsi Max and Tomorrowland and Fede Legrand, and then I showed Red Lights to Fede. And he really liked the track and he wanted to sign it right away, but he asked me to change the rhythm of the bass line a little bit. And I was kinda embarrassed, I'm not gonna lie, and I looked up to him and said I used a sample for the bass line. Because up until this moment, I thought you have to do all by yourself, like sound design, preset creation, and producing the track from scratch. So Fede just looked at me and was like, yo, no one is gonna care where the bass line is coming from. Like, he didn't care, other DJs won't care, labels won't care, listeners won't care where this bass line is coming from. No one is gonna care, and no one would stop listening to the track just because you said you used a bass line loop. I mean, obviously, you should try to not use all of the loops that everyone else is using, because there are some loops and vocal loops and melody loops that are very overused. Mainly if you go on Splice and just search for, I don't know, vocal and then go for the first 2 pages, I would not be using any of these because probably someone else already used them, but you get my idea. It's totally fine to buy sample packs, finding a great melody or bassline loop and just use it in your production. If the song sounds good, the song sounds good. And it doesn't matter if it's a sample or if you have made all the sound design by yourself. I mean, if you're able to sound design everything yourself, that is always the better option. But even if you just know the basics of sound design so you can tweak presets and samples to your liking, that is more than enough. Like, you don't have to know everything about sound design to be a successful artist. You just don't. I can only speak for myself, but I rather listen to Fede Legrand and Zed than to any other bedroom producer who will try to convince me otherwise.
I love presets. It saves me tons of time. I'm not good at like coding sound design from scratch. So I like to go through presets and then I find something that's in the range of what I like and then I tweak it from there. The fact that you use presets moons all the sound design purists. Also want your opinion on them. I don't give a at all, dude. You can use a preset or not. I'm a musician. I'm not a sound designer. Obviously, part of that is my job, but I'm a musician. Whatever makes me make the best song. I don't care about using presets. I don't have like an ego problem. It's just about making good music, honestly. Who cares? If your music is just sound design, if there's no harmonic elements to it and it's literally just noises, yeah, then making your noise is probably important. But I don't care about that. I make music, harmonic, melody, and chords and stuff like that, you know? So for me, I don't care about being a purist or anything. I just want to make music. I don't have to prove myself to anyone, you know what I mean? I find people who are making music to prove themselves to other people is kind of silly.
Finally, last but not least, you don't have to do everything by yourself. There are some producers out there who will go above and beyond just to make sure that all they are doing in their production is 100% made by themselves. From recording the samples, from the sound design, from mixing, mastering, arranging, everything. I kind of get this approach, and for the longest time I thought the same way about it, but then I realized that this just makes me release less music. I work full-time, 40 hours a week. I live together with my girlfriend and I have a good relationship with all my closest friends, so I see them quite often. I make YouTube videos and I make music. This is a lot to do in 24 hours each day. I'm not the best when it comes down to mastering. I do all my production by myself until the point of mastering. So whenever my production is finished and I'm happy with the mix, I'm gonna bounce out the track and send it to a mastering engineer. And I'm gonna master the track myself as well. And when the version from the mastering engineer comes back to me, I'm gonna compare them and listen to both of them. And then I will decide which one is the better version. And 99% of the time, the version from the mastering engineer sounds better than mine. Sometimes you just gotta put your ego aside and you have to realize that you're not the best at everything. And that is totally fine, because I pay this mastering engineer to give me the best possible song and I release the best possible song. And if this means not my version is going to be released, but the one from the mastering engineer, then it's still going to be my song. I just worked with someone else to make the best possible product and best possible song for the listeners out there, because they deserve getting the best possible song. And in my opinion, that is not only for mastering, but for the whole production process as well. Because if you really believe that your favorite artists are playing 200 shows a year, touring the world, and still are producing all of their music 100% by themselves, then I've got some bad news for you. At the end of the day, the more successful you get, the more you realize that this is a business, and the product, which is essentially the music and the artist itself, is more important than the ego of the person behind the artist. Obviously, there are some exceptions, but this is not often the case. These are 5 things I wish I knew before I became a music producer. I really hope some of them will help you out. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. As always, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content about music production and the music industry. Thanks for watching, everybody. My name is Empra, and I see you in the next one.